Okay, everybody, front and center, phones in your pocket or somewhere where you're not looking at them. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about emissions and shop stuff. Watch up here.
Shop stuff.
Yep, emissions and shop stuff. And I'll give you a little bit more information about some of these systems here. Positive crankcase ventilation has been around since 1961. More or less. Some people may say a little earlier. I saw something in an encyclopedia one time that said it came out in 62 on the Corvair. Simple fact is, it's basically taking crankcase blow by, recycling it so that it doesn't stink up the air. In the cities it was really bad when they had a draft tube. They used to have just a tube coming out of the block that was open to the air, and it was cut at an angle so when you were driving, air would blow by and it would draw the stuff out into the atmosphere. And that was bad because these traffic cops had a terrible time in the city with that stuff. Alright, so right here we got manifold vacuum here. We got the crankcase here. And we're going to let this, you might notice at idle speed how that little plunger in that PCV valve is down there. At high speed, you got max flow. And if it backfires, that thing will close so that it doesn't actually shove a bunch of air back into the manifold. Alright, I may have had that backwards. I may have put those arrows backwards. Actually, I did put them backwards. I got manifold vacuum and crankcase reversed. Manifold vacuum's over there, crankcase is over here. So basically, we don't want it backfiring and going through the valve into the... Alright, let's go. Sorry about that. Got the words backwards because I was probably half asleep when I put that together. When the PCV system doesn't work right, moisture gathers in the crankcase and makes a milky brown residue. How many of you have ever pulled an oil filler cap off and seen this milky brown crud? That typically means the PCV system is not working like it ought to. And it's a good upsell if you're working in a place like Zane works in the afternoons. If you see this milky stuff, then we need to service this guy's PCV system because he's got crud in the crankcase. That doesn't mean that you've got a blown head gasket. It doesn't mean that you've got intake gaskets blown. The first place you're going to go is to look at the PCV system. Now, back around the 2000s, there was a bunch of Toyotas that had PCV systems that didn't work well, and the problem they had was a serious, nasty sludge problem. It was bad enough to where they had to replace some of their engines. It costs more to pull an engine down and desludge it and put it back together with new parts than it does just to replace the engine. That's one of the reasons they were doing that. Now, both points on the engine need to be high on the engine. You might notice that up here, you've got your PCV. There's your vacuum, pulling it out of there. And then this right here, this is an older one. Look at your oil temperature. The oil temperature is over 212 degrees, and you got moisture that's boiling out of the oil. And if you're not pulling that out along with this blow-by gas, you can see how that's going to sludge everything up. That's that moisture. Remember, you're making a gallon of water for every gallon of gas you burn. Here's the sequence of events. The engine starts, the engine vacuum is created. There will be a test on this on Monday if you're not paying attention today. PCV valve regulates flow through the crankcase. Filtered air enters the engine and carries blow-by gases. Now sometimes the crankcase filter is in the breather. Sometimes it's basically drawing air out of the intake stream so it can be metered by the mass airflow sensor. Everybody can remember that, right? Somebody read that first one.
Engine starts.
What's the second one say? How's the engine vacuum created?
Sucking in.
You got a throttle plate, and it's pulling. It's your atmosphere on the outside of the throttle plate. Pistons pulling down, making low pressure. You got that. What happens next? Somebody talk to me. Does that talk like you don't have your mouth full of cotton? Filtered air enters the engine and carries away blow-by gases. Now then. EGR, since about 1972 on gas engines. Now diesel engines have got EGR too. What are we fighting with EGR? What gas are we worried about? Nitrous oxide, NOx formation. We don't want to form NOx. Recirculated to percent NOx formation since the exhaust gas is inert. Since it has mass, it takes the place of some of the O2 in the mix and cools the combustion chamber. Because if you take away some of the oxygen, it doesn't burn as hot. Right? You remember when we were out there and I was showing you fundamentals guys the torch. And whenever you put that orange flame on where all you had was the oxygen in the air, it wasn't a very hot flame. It was hot enough to make you uncomfortable and might burn your arm, but it wasn't hot enough to make metal red, was it? When you put oxygen in there coming out with it, it got really, really hot. You know, it got probably 2,500 degrees, something like that. All right, so the exhaust gas is in there. And we're basically, you might notice on some of the GM cars, they used to have these little solenoids. And those solenoids would be operated by the PCM, and that would cause the EGR to flow. And this here like to clog up with crud and all that. Okay, you got your mass air meter regulating throttle plate. You notice, yeah, your EGR valve is taking exhaust gas and putting it right into the mix right behind the throttle plate. That's usually the way that works, usually. All right, feedback systems on the EGR system different from OBD2 system. The EGR system is required to be a closed loop system. On Ford and GM vehicles, they started having closed loop stuff early on. Also, some of the Asian stuff had closed loop stuff by measuring temperature even before OBD2. Some EGR systems use sensors to measure flow, like this one here. That's like the one on this engine I'm standing next to. You basically have an orifice right here. If EGR is flowing through here, what's going to happen to the pressure in these tubes? I've got EGR, excuse me, not flowing that way, it's flowing this way. It's coming out of the exhaust into the intake. So what's going to happen to the pressure in these two tubes? I've got an orifice in between them. Think about that as a pipe with a little washer in it. How's the pressure going to differ? What's the pressure going to do in this tube right here? When it's not flowing, the pressure is the same. So what's going to happen to the pressure in that tube right there? It's going to go up, and that one's going to go down. Did you know sometimes when people hook those pipes up backwards with a sensor, it'll actually tell you, their scan tool will say it'll throw a code and it says you got them hooked up backwards. This is a delta pressure feedback EGR sensor. And what it does is it basically, the voltage on the metal ones, like this one you see up here, is about 0.6 of a volt. The more EGR flow you get, the more it goes to 4.5. So it's a 3-wire sensor. If this sensor is shorted out on one of these Ford vehicles, you won't have any fuel injection, you won't have any scan tool communication, it will not start.
EGR is not that important.
It depends on which engine you're talking about. Now on some engines, back whenever people would take EGR loose on them, and what it would do, well, let me give you a little EGR story here. This guy's in his yard, and he's tinkering with his car, and he likes to turn screws and watch things happen, so he turns the the idle speed screw a little bit. And this is one he's working on back in the early 70s with a carburetor. So he turns it up just a little bit. He opens the throttle plate just because he wants to make it run. In his mind, he's making it better. So he gives it a little bit more idle speed. And then he's driving it, and as he's driving it, he's noticing that it's starting to idle a little rough. And so he goes to his neighbor's house who knows a little more than he does and says, I'm idling a little rough, and I don't know why. Because he doesn't tell the neighbor he turned the screw. So the neighbor says, well, that's probably that crappy old EGR valve. So the neighbor pulls the EGR valve and it idles smoother. Because the guy, whenever he idled it up a little bit, he's delivering a little bit of ported vacuum through the thermal vacuum switch to the EGR valve, and it's trying to work it idle, which makes it run rough. So the guy puts a BB in that line and puts it back on there so he doesn't have EGR anymore. Well, now he's having to drive it and listen to a ping that wasn't there before. Labor knock. Because now the combustion chamber is not running as cool, and with the ignition timing set like it is, he winds up with it pinging. Doesn't know what to do about that, so he goes back to another buddy of his, and that buddy says, I usually just retard the timing a little bit to get rid of that ping. So the guy retards the timing a little bit. Now his ping is gone, but so is some of his power, and his gas mileage has gone to crap. So he has to take it to a real mechanic, and the real mechanic starts backtracking through all that. Well, the timing's not right. Well, now I'm hearing a ping. Well, who did away with the EGR valve? He puts it back. Well, it's idling rough. Well, now he puts the idle back where it's supposed to be. The guy's got to go back and undo everything everybody did. You know what I mean? As for me and my EGR, it's going to keep flowing. I kind of like EGR. Got no problem with it. Now, I will tell you, in the late 80s, exhaust gas recirculation, in the late 80s, it could cause them to surge, and you'd have to replace the little solenoids and stuff. But EGR is not a bad thing.
What about like on motor?
On the old motor you got right there, well, the stuff, the modifications you're making to that motor, all bets are off. Just don't ever drive it in California, because if they pull you over, they'll impound the vehicle because it ain't got EGR and it came with it. So just be a.
I mean, that ain't going to cause no running
Well, no, because what you're going to do when you set it up to start with, you're going to set it so that the timing set so that it won't ping and all that and everything. So you'll probably be okay with that, but your gas mileage will probably be about 12 miles to the gallon. Okay. Now then, newer GM systems measure manifold vacuum and EGR panel position. What happens to manifold vacuum when EGR is flowing? It drops. If you flow EGR, it drops. We need to recheck the vacuum on that truck you just got through working on too, see what it looks like now. Okay. All right, early GM systems watch the O2 sensor voltage that drifts higher when EGR is flowing. And for some reason my clicker got ugly. Appeal 401 code is the result of this clogged stuff right here. See this EGR passage right here? EGR basically is running your gas in here, and it was supposed to go running here behind the throttle plate. When it clogs up with crud, you got a PO 401 code. This is a very common problem on just about any platform you want to talk about. It'll either clog right here at the EGR, the passage going here through the EGR will clog. We've actually had to take like an old piece of a park brake cable that had a threaded end on it, cut it and make it into whiskers on the end, and run it down in this Pontiac Aztec that had EGR issues. Pull the EGR valve off, pull the throttle body off. You can see it was completely clogged up with carbon. Ran that cable up through there, spinning it with a drill, and cleaned all that out, blew it out really good. Carburetor cleaned it, and we wound up doing away with their PO 401 code. Now, EGR ports left are clogged with that crud. I mean, it's just nasty, nasty. All right. PCM checks the sequence of events. PCM checks ECT for proper engine temperature. Checks throttle position and engine speed. Opens EGR and monitors feedback to make sure an EGR flows. When is EGR supposed to flow? Somebody tell me. When is it not supposed to flow? Maybe that's easier. Huh?
When it's not running.
And when it's cold? Oh, come on, McBride. What? When you first crank it up, and what else? When? Where else?
And it ain't gonna flow when you're cruising. Or it's either not gonna flow when you're cruising.
It does flow when you're cruising, but not when you're idling. It does not flow at wide open throttle. So the only time you ought to be at hot cruise, operating temperature cruising, your EGR ought to be flowing. Once again, you got one that's idling rough and it's not a dead skip on any one cylinder, and you lay your hand on the manifold, like 60 seconds after you started it. If the manifold's getting blistering hot, you best be checking EGR because it's probably flowing. Seen that before. Lay the hand on the oh, that's hot. Pull the EGR valve loose and all of a sudden it's smooth again. Right? All right. If you charge a person for parts or labor you did not deliver, is that stealing?
Yes.
You got a wire harness that time for
charge a person for parts or labor you didn't deliver.
If the car comes in there and you say, hey, you need this, that, and the other, and they say, or sometimes I've known of mechanics I hear about, they'll bring a brake rotor out there that's just all chewed up, and they say, this is your brake rotor, we got to redo your brakes. And they say, oh gosh, that's my brakes, I don't want to die. So he pays the guy $900 to redo his brakes because they showed him a crappy brake rotor. Never took him back there and showed him the car. The people trust him really bad. So anytime you do that, there was a guy that I knew that I worked with for years, and I really liked the guy. I didn't have anything against him, but he died. Just got old and died. And whenever they were cleaning out his toolbox and over there, all up under the bench there was new parts that he had up under there in boxes that he had never put on. Wow. He got paid to put them on, but he didn't put them on. Now, if you ever do that one time, it'll be really easy to do it the second time and the third time. But sooner or later, somebody's going to find out what you did. You know what I mean? It's stealing if you charge somebody for parts or labor you didn't deliver, right? Also, if the boss man is paying you a salary and not commission, and there's not anything to do, you need to be sweeping, you need to be cleaning. If you got time to lean, you got time to clean. You know what I'm saying? That's how that works. You know that, don't you? All right, evap system. Since 1971, the evaporator system pipes hydrocarbons that evaporate from the fuel tank by storing them and then drawing them through the engine when the PCM decides to. And the PCM may decide to, on the newer vehicles, it may decide to just any time it wants to. It may be idling when it does it. It used to do it just when you were cruising, but now you can be sitting at a stoplight and it'll start purging. George Baum came over here one day and he says, my truck will be sitting here and all of a sudden it just starts running terrible. And I said, okay, let's see what it does. So I plugged the scan tool and I looked and I saw whenever it kicked on the canister purge, it almost died. I said, George, you're packing your gas tank when you fill it up, aren't you? And he goes, well, yeah, I always do that. Well, stop doing that and you'll quit having this problem. And he quit packing his gas tank, and he told everybody that, he told me to quit packing my gas tank, and he fixed my problem. That's not the first person I've ever seen that done that. All right. You got fuel vapor lines, you got canister vent valves. These two guys back here that are working on the Mazda are really familiar with that. Purge valves up here, vent valves back there. Nowadays, the canister vent valve will typically have a filter on it because dusty roads will actually allow, when it's purging a canister, it will pull dust and dirt in there and clog this up. We've got one of our college trucks right now, an 06 Chevy, that needs the canister replaced because it's clogged up with dust. And the code for that is that it won't bleed up whenever it releases the canister vent.
Isn't that what was wrong with Brian's car?
Brian's? Well, no, Brian's car had a bad canister purge valve. And whenever in a canister purge valve, when you gas up the tank, it would push vapor right on into the intake. You know, because it was supposed to be closed. That valve's supposed to be closed. But this is kind of on the frame, what it looks like on some of your Chevy trucks and stuff. All right. Early evap systems didn't check for leaks. All they did is just kind of an overview of the system. You notice you got this line here with an orifice going in here. You basically had this right up here going over. The carburetor, since there was gas in here, it would let vapor go in there too. And basically right here you had your purge valve. And so whenever your distributor vacuum tube would come over here, you had a little, right here is where it would purge. See, they had that one teed into the PCV line. This one right here, with the carburetor, you notice that that vacuum port is above the throttle plate. So when you crack the throttle plate, it would operate that diaphragm, it would open the diaphragm, it would purge the canister. This is kind of what it looks like when you blow it up bigger. So you got your purge control valve, which is here. You got a spring and a diaphragm. The port you can't see over here is the one that caused it to open. Well, that port caused it to open up. This is the one that comes from the engine or the tank, one of the two. Some of them is different sizes. That's the vent over there. Your canister vent on your new ones is put over here. This was just an open hole, not anymore. All right. Now the new evap system has got, there's the OBD2 system monitor. You got a purge solenoid, purge flow sensor on some of them. That purge flow sensor is not there on all vehicles. It was there on some of the Rangers and stuff. We used to have to replace them all the time. It's just a little inline thing with a thermistor in there so that when the purge gases start going through there, it sees a change in temperature and the computer knows that it's good. Those used to crap out all the time. They did away with those in the 90s. The evap canister, you got vapors in your gas tank, and so on and so forth. There's your fuel level sensor. It needs to know it's got to be above 15%, below 85% before it'll even check the evaporative system. That right there is what your pressure sensor looks like. There's your canister, and there's your little vent solenoid. See the filter that's built onto it? It keeps the dust out of that box right there, because this is connected to that. If you open your paycheck one Friday and find the payroll department made a mistake and gave you $100 more than you should have been paid, what's the right thing to do?
Take it and update those.
Take it, buy some lottery tickets. No, give it back.
That's them.
Talk to them.
The way I was getting paid at the Ford place, I told him, I want this much money a week. And I'll look after you in bad times. I mean, in the good times, and you look after me in the bad times. I want a nice level pay every week on the same amount of money. I could have got paid any way I wanted to, but that's what I asked. Well, every now and then, those ladies up in the front that figured up the payroll would piddle around and pay me commission, which would be if I turned 67 hours, and sometimes I would turn a lot more hours than, you know, I'd usually turn about 40, 45, 50. But if I turned 67 hours in those days, the way I was getting paid, and that did change later, I would see a paycheck that was several $100s higher than I was accustomed to getting when I opened my check. I go straight up to the payroll clerk and I say, what happened here? Oh, yeah, Lee, I paid you wrong. Okay, you need to fix that. Cut me a new check, take it out next week's, whatever. That happened about 3 times. And what happened as a result of that is a bunch of the big wigs were talking. And they said, we got 25 mechanics back in our shop, and the only one that we can really trust if we pay him too much to tell us the truth is him. See what I mean? I mean, the thing about it is, if they make a mistake in your error, I mean, you know, if you're at the cash register and the lady gives you $10 back too much, what do you do with that? I give it back to her. You know, just give it back to her. My integrity is worth more to me than $10 or $200 or $500 or $5,000. And I don't like that stuff when somebody's coming, they say, when I had a purchase order book when I was working at a company in Texas, and they would say, if you'll buy this barrel of chemical that you don't need, we will give you a Remington 1100 shotgun and a new color TV. And nobody will be the wiser. We'll ship it right to your house.
If it's somebody I know, I'm going to be honest with you. But if you got some castrator up here that's too high to know anything, and they give me 10 extra bucks, I'll let go of it.
Well, what you got to remember is what goes around comes around. You know what I mean? It's still stealing. You know what I mean? Basically. I mean, you might not get put in jail for it, but it's not a good thing to do. All right, the answer is, you know they made an error in your favor, y'all bring it to their attention. It's the only right thing to do. All right, air system. Now, General Motors calls this air injection reactor. Ford calls it thermactor. They got different names for it. It's AIR system since the mid-1960s, mandatory in the 70s. The AIR system or thermactor system is all about helping get rid of cold starred hydrocarbons and helping with the catalyst deal with NOx. So what it does, when it's cold, it puts air upstream to help with the hydrocarbons, and then it puts it downstream to the light-off cap and helps it with turning. Well, actually, in order for the light-off cap to work, you've got to put oxygen downstream of it. You can't put it upstream of it. So if you've got an air pipe going in between the two bricks in a catalytic converter, the front one's the light-off cap that takes care of the NOx. The back one does the hydrocarbons and the carbon monoxide. Add a molecule of oxygen to carbon monoxide, you got carbon dioxide. Add 2 molecules of oxygen and hydrocarbons, you got carbon dioxide. And this is kind of what it looks like. Older air injection systems had belt-driven pumps. What have you seen in here with a belt-driven air pump?
Belt-driven air pump?
It's got an air pump for that system, and it's driven by a belt. There's 2 of them, 2 vehicles that I know of that you guys have seen. One of them is the Bronco, has a belt-driven air pump. It's on the passenger side of the engine sitting down low. The other one is the Cadillac of Dr. Rydell's. It's got a belt-driven air pump. Now, I will tell you that somebody took the guts out of that one, and it's just acting like an idler, you know what I'm saying?
On which one?
On that Cadillac. But anyway, the belt-driven air pump was common, but some of the vehicle platforms had pulse air valves that used the natural low-pressure puffs in the exhaust. Some of them didn't even have an air pump. They just have pulse air valves, and they basically had that stuff so that every time you have a low puff in the exhaust, like you got pressure and vacuum in the exhaust, had a reed valve in there that would bounce. And that's basically, there's a check valve right there that would basically keep exhaust. When the exhaust pressure is higher than this, they don't want it coming up this way. Whenever you would give it gas, when I went to General Motors School in 1981 in Houston out there, she would tell us, you know, when you rev it up and you let it off, you'll hear the dump. You'll hear it go like that. Anti-afterburn valve, what they call that. It's kind of anti-backfire. But whenever you got the carburetor, it's got the gas is going down through that intake. You got a whole bunch of gas and sweaty droplets that's hanging around on the inside of that intake. All right, if you let that let off on the gas, and that vacuum, you know, level, if the air pressure goes away, that unburnt gas right there goes through with no oxygen, goes into the exhaust, and if you happen to have this air system putting air back in the exhaust, it will light off like a bomb back there. Boom! Make big backfire noises. Sometimes they go pop, 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 pop. When people are letting off, you know, you'll hear that kind of thing. We used to have to work with those and get that to stop. So you had to kind of understand how all that stuff worked.
Are you talking about like let off the gas?
Let off the gas, it backfire.
Like mine does?
Yeah. And I would let off the gas, and I let off the gas on that old Volkswagen Carmen Ghia I used to drive. Had megaphone tailpipes out the back, you know, straight out the back like on a Volkswagen. I could shut that thing off, and gas would keep going in there, you know, because of the carburetor. And when I turned it back on, it'd go boom, big flames come out. Look like 2 shotguns out there. Anyway, the electric air injection pump is what you got now. Most of them have got an electric pump. And you got a check valve there and there. The check valves are there because you don't want exhaust, that old hot exhaust getting up in there burning up your plastic pump, you know. And the vehicle starts, PCM determines coolant intake temp, triggers secondary air pump relay to power up the pump. Pump ground secondary air solenoid, and the intake manifold vacuum travels through the combination valve. You will get a chance to do that. If you borrow something from your employer without asking and never return it, is that the same from stealing?
Yes.
There's this boy one day that was in here that was a dual enrollment student. He said, I need a flashlight. And I pulled a flashlight out of my pocket. It's one of those you stick in the cigarette lighter to charge up. And he goes, hey, this is really cool. I've never seen one of these before. And he went and used it, took it home with him and wouldn't bring it back. And I kept telling him, why have you got my flashlight at home? Oh, it's sitting on my dresser. I keep forgetting to bring it. And then finally he says, well, I've lost it. I don't know where it is. It wasn't the point. The flashlight wasn't much money. But the fact that he borrowed it and refused to bring it back. If somebody will do that, they'll walk out of there with something that's not theirs. As soon as, if they'll steal it when you are looking, you know they'll steal it when you're not. Right? All right. Belongs to somebody else and you take it and keep it, you've stolen it. End of story. All right? I don't care if it's a fuse, a quart of oil, a cotter kit. Catalyst efficiency, catalytic converters more or less since 1975 when we first started building catalytic converters. They were saying in all of these news magazines there's no way they can build enough catalytic converters because it's just too hard to make them and they can't make those things fast enough to satisfy the automobile industry and people won't be able to get new cars, and all of that was a bunch of hogwash. It was like people saying we were all going to starve to death by the year 2000 and all of the cities were going to be underwater and all that kind of junk. That's what they were telling us back in the years ago. All right, they're telling us that now too, and it's hogwash. It's all hogwash. All right, HCCO and NOx goes in, CO2 and H2O goes out. If you've got a downstream oxygen sensor that's sluggish and an upstream oxygen sensor that's snappy like that, that's the way it's supposed to be. You hear me? If you've got an upstream oxygen sensor and a downstream oxygen sensor that look just alike, you're a catalyst that is not storing oxygen properly. However, don't discount the effect of that rear sensor because, well, let me back up here. I think I may have shut that thing twice. No, maybe I'll get to you in just a minute on that. I probably put that slide in the wrong place. Fuel trims, and I'll get to it in a minute about that rear oxygen sensor. Don't give up on that because we're almost through. Fuel trims, short and long, provide a correction factor to balance the mix when the combustion process drifts too far off. The one you were working on had positive fuel trims up around 25 because why? 3 injectors were completely clogged. And we had 3 cylinders that were getting no gas whatsoever. All right. Closed loop fuel control is the name of the game here. A perfect mix is the target of this system. It's watching all the time, making adjustments on what it sees with the oxygen sensor. And that's what your fuel trims look like. Lean exhaust is going to drive the fuel trim that way. A rich exhaust is going to drive it that way. If you see 25 minus, that's because your exhaust is rich and it's trying to correct for it. If you see 25 plus, and the numbers are going to look the same on long and short, they just behave differently, right? Now, this is the other thing. The rear sensors can affect fuel trim. You got it? Like you could put a bug on a car like that so that the rear sensor was lying to the computer. The computer wants that catalytic converter to be happy above all costs because those things are expensive and the manufacturer doesn't want to have to buy one. That's why they flash the check engine light. That's why they turn off an injector whenever the cylinder stops firing for some reason. All right. Most mechanics might not realize it, but if the rear sensors are reading incorrectly, the PCM is going to throw the fuel trim all out of whack, trying to fix what the rear sensors are doing. That's just the way it is. Matter of fact, some of the CarQuest Technical Institute guys have actually done experiments on that with various different vehicles, and they had a little sensor simulator back there that they would hook up to the oxygen sensor behind the catalyst, and they would short it out to the point of where it wouldn't know it was shorted out, but it just thought it was reading low, and the fuel trims would go crazy trying to fix that. And that's the one behind the catalyst. Doesn't happen a lot, but be aware that it can happen. You know, I mean, for years I figured, oh, that one behind the catalytic converter is as unnecessary as an EGR valve. I don't need to worry about that. It'll mess you up, man. You fix everything up to the cat and aren't thinking about it. No, the cat's not stopped up. That oxygen sensor reading that, you're going to have some issues. A perceived lean condition drives the fuel pulse up. A perceived rich condition drives the fuel pulse down. And those two sensors, they instantly react. So an analysis of what happens in a combustion chamber, and the PCM tilts the teeter-totter back and forth. All the time, it's tilting the teeter-totter. It's all about adaptive learning to maintain balance. Sequence works this way. On cold start, key on engine coolant, air temperature, barometric pressure, they're all measured really fast. Also, closed throttle voltage is noted. The crank sensor starts